Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Juliana from Argentina, living in France. I'm a linguist by training and a polyglot, although that's a little bit of a big word for me. Three languages I speak very well and 3 not so well. So I hope everybody can hear me well. I see new faces arriving. And because we weren't recording yet, I'll start again with my question. Let's see, everybody there? Okay, could you raise your hand maybe or write on the chat if you've actually studied linguistics before on your own or at university? No? All right, well, don't feel bad, huh? Because if I was at a linguistics conference right now and I asked the same question, except in reverse, and I told them, are you a polyglot? Most people would not raise their hand. In fact, most linguists speak one language, two sometimes. And I think that's kind of part of the problem, that we're divided in those fields. Polyglots could benefit from some stuff from linguistics and vice versa. But usually linguists are people who stay behind their desks, you know, not everybody, but it's a big part of the linguistics field. So let's start. I'm going to share my screen. Many of you know probably what I'm going to show you just to begin with. Even though you've never done linguistics, or some of you have, people say that the sign is arbitrary, right? Do you all know that concept? Yes, more or less? Okay. Basically, it means that when you're born in a certain culture, you develop as you learn to view the world in different ways. You have a concept, say a tree. And then in your language, you're going to have a word, a random word that means tree. In English, it's tree. In Spanish, it's árbol. In Russia, дерево. And nobody knows why that link is there, right? So linguistics won't explain why did English speakers come up with tree and why did Spanish speakers come up with árbol. Do you know? Have you ever wondered why? It's curious, huh? And why is it that some of the languages choose the same sounds to represent different things? For example, gâteau in French is a cake and gato in Spanish is a cat. Go figure, right? Nobody knows why. So we have the same sounds, but each culture kind of chooses to represent a concept with these sounds. And it's a mystery, and it has been. The first one to mention it actually was Socrates, so a far, long time ago. And he said that sounds actually had an intrinsic meaning. And that's what I believe after researching for years on this domain. And I just want to show you 3 different ways in which you can kind of get an idea about that. So let me tell you, for example, this is the general idea, okay? So in the same way that in physics we have matter, and we have, depending on who you ask, you have 26 or 100 atoms that form everything in existence from a rock to us, right? You also have in biology 20 amino acids, 20 little proteins that will go to form cells and a butterfly and a cat and us. And in any given language, you have an average of 20 consonants and 5 vowels, okay? So I think there's a big parallel between what we see in nature. So you go from the atom to the molecules, and notice that molecules have shapes. We'll come back to that in a minute. And in biology, you have proteins, and those proteins go to form organs and the body and the cells and everything. And in language, you have letters, although I'll focus more on sounds today. You have letters, and then you go on to form speech, right? So the letters and the sounds would be kind of like the little cells in our bodies. And biology is discovering a lot more about genes and about molecules. At the time when Darwin came up with his theory of evolution, we didn't know anything about genes, about DNA, etc. And now that we know, we see that it's actually a lot more complex than we were told originally. Why can't it be the same with language? So let's start with a little test. This is one of my favorite linguists. Has anybody heard of him? No? Yes? Okay. He did in the 30s an experiment, and he told people from all over the world, he said, if I tell you that in a very obscure language in Africa, these two words mean table, one is small and one is big, which one would you say is big? Can you write it on the chat? Yes, okay, the majority of you are guessing right. And if you ask everybody around the world, 90% of the people will tell you that mile is the big table. Now, nobody knows why. You could say, well, maybe it's because the I is big in the mouth and the E is small, right? But that's just one tiny example of a pattern that repeats itself over and over. Yes, very good, Leonardo. You came up with the second one, Taquete and Maluma. There's two shapes. Which one is round and which one is spiky? The round one is very good. Okay, so you see there's something kind of universal. You ask a Chinese person, you ask an English person, anybody, and they'll tell you that Maluma is round. So could there be something in the sounds that made our ancestors, made language decide that some sounds are associated with certain shapes? That's the very basic stuff. But there's three other studies that very few of you may know if you do. Um, the first one is by Margaret Magnus. She's a linguist, and she coined the term phonosemantics, so the meaning behind phonemes, the sound languages, right? And what she came up with after looking, she took the entire English dictionary and divided words by categories and by sounds. Each sound, each letter, each word, sorry, that began with B, for example, with P, with L, and she came up with categories. And she says that in every word, in all the languages, in every word, the word that has one specific sound has some specific element of meaning, and if you remove that sound and change it for another one, the meaning will change. She calls those phonemes. So usually in linguistics, and probably you know about it, you start off with the word. So the word is the concept, right? The tree, as I showed you in the beginning. And sometimes you have morphemes too. So possible, impossible. The im in impossible is a morpheme. It's not a word, but it's a chunk of meaning. She says that there's two types of meanings, and this is actually something that is confusing linguists all the time, because most linguists will go for the tree. This is the reference, the tree, that's all there is, right? What if there was a meaning in each of the letters that sort of adds color to the word? It doesn't define the word, but it adds color to it. And I'll give you an example. She also took strings of words. You have the sequence STR. And she found out that a majority of words with STR meant something linear, like a line, like a road, okay? And you have words like string, strip, stripe, street. They're all long, right? Then you have app, and it all means flat. Cap, flap, lap. No. What word do you get if you combine them? Very easy. A strap. Yes, and what is a strap? It's something flat and linear at the same time. Now, the interesting thing about this is that you'll never see it in etymology. If you look for etymological, for the root of these words, one of them will tell you, oh, it comes from Old Gaelic or Proto-Germanic, etc. And nobody looks at these patterns that, that keep forming when you separate sounds in this way. And then in the end, she ends up with something like this. So each phoneme will group words that have some kind of characteristic. It's abstract. You can't say B means fire, for example, but you have words like burn here, and explosions. You have bombs and blasts, etc. So all of B is actually in this category. And she also found that, for example, Norwegian will share, say, this much of the characteristics, and Russian this many. So it's almost as if each language had chosen certain characteristics of each phoneme and used them in words that we think are random. So that's the first way you could do it. She did many, many experiments. I'm going to make YouTube videos about it because it's too long to explain today. The second one, I don't know if anybody's familiar with this book, No venimos del latín. It has been translated into English. Romance languages don't come from Latin. And it's really amazing, actually, her theory. I don't have time to go through it, but she really makes a case for Latin being a cousin of the Romance languages and not the mother. So, but basically for sound, she quotes studies by philologists and linguists, and she tells you how they do it. They take words that we think are the most random ones, names of places. These are names of places in Spain, and you can, as you can see, if you know Spanish, they don't mean anything, right? It's just the name of the place. Well, what they found was that when they grouped thousands of words, each of these shared a characteristic based on the map, based on the landscape, right? So anything that had ba in it was related to water. Anything that had ka in it was related to rock, k. Anything that had ya or la meant that it was a confluence of rivers, for example, and so on and so forth. So just to give you a more concrete example, if you take any town, this is a town by close to Barcelona, and you say, well, okay, what's the origin? You know, historical linguists will be like, what's the origin? Maybe there was valerian plants all over the place, and that was the landmark. Or maybe there was a famous Valerius in Roman times who that the town was called after. Except if you take the particles that I just showed you and you separate them, these are the words you get. And the town in question happens to be in a big valley, and it's a place where many rivers meet. So that's interesting because any word that we think is random may actually have roots. It's been done in Basque as well. There's many examples for Basque. For example, the word ur, water, and how many rivers in Europe are called ur something. It gives something to think about because we think this is all random. Another little example that she brings up is that usually we think, oh, well, the word slave in Romance languages, in English, in German, comes from Latin slavos, except nobody knows why you get that C here, that k sound. And they say, well, it's because Slavs were made into slaves, except slavery existed way before Rome, and is kind of not really a good explanation for why so many languages chose that k, and Latin doesn't have it. Not only that, but in Latin, slave is actually servus. So it's a bit iffy as an explanation. If you take the particles like I just showed you, you end up with meanings like ex, like former, ex-minister, living being, related to, and free or unbound. So if you were to read it from right to left, you end up with something that means used to be a free human being. So see, again, a word that is completely arbitrary according to the mainstream explanation could have a hidden meaning. And I think that would be super important for etymologists, for people who are interested in words, actually, to look into these particles and find out more. Okay, and the last one, this is my favorite. So get ready to write on the chat a little bit. I highly recommend that you read this book. It's kind of rare, but basically he did an amazing work with all languages confounded. The previous two that I showed you are more for European, Indo-European languages. So the first one was English and some Russian and Norwegian, actually. And the second one was Romance languages. This one takes all the languages in the world. And his idea is that at a certain point in time, human beings actually spoke with both hemispheres. There wasn't such a lateralization in language. So we used symbols and metaphor a lot more, kind of like a language that we get when we dream. And if you think about it, it's not impossible because on the one hand, we're trying to find Indo-European roots and a very complex language as a mother of the other languages that we speak today, and maybe a perfect mother tongue. Some people think that exists. And yet we talk about people back from 10,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, as being more primitive than we are today. So how can you be more primitive and yet have a better language than you have nowadays? I think languages don't evolve, they change. So there's a lot of misunderstandings there. And what he brings about actually makes you question a lot of things. This is why I call the talk the elephant in the room, is because my idea is that each word in each language, say take the word, I don't know, book in any language, right? And you have shoe in Chinese, you have libro in Spanish, livre, etc. Each of these books will have picked certain sounds, but they will be describing a different part of reality. And in this little story, we're all a bunch of blind men, and we can't see the elephant. We just look at one little part of the elephant, and each of us thinks, oh, well, it's a rope, it's a, and the idea is that only working together or having, say, all the languages of the world together, we would actually have a more accurate view of reality, of what words mean, of what languages express. And what I'm saying now is actually, it's applicable to syntax, to grammar, to everything. Why did each culture choose a different kind of representation for reality? So let's do a test. This is how he does it, right? He takes what he calls square units. And to find those, he searches in the 7,000 languages of the world, and he finds synonyms. Now, it's not the usual definition of a synonym as in pretty, beautiful, gorgeous, all in English, but across languages. So in this case, for example, okay, so this will be a vertical connection. And then on the horizontal line, you'll always get homonyms, so words that sound the same. And he picks consonants because the consonants are a little more stable. In dialects, in the way we speak, vowels tend to vary more also throughout history. So he picks consonants, right? So first we start trying to find two words in any language of the world that mean the same thing. In this case, we have mèche and wick. So it's the little thing that goes inside a candle, right? And then in order to have a square unit, you have to have two words that have these sounds, sh, in any language of the world, and then w and k. And you find them in these two words. Now, the strange thing about this is that all of them have, lo and behold, different roots. According to historical linguistics, all of them have different roots. Why would that be? Why would people in different cultures choose similar sounds to depict the same concept? So what he finds is that every time you get a square like that, you have sort of a gravity, a force field that attracts these words that actually link their meaning. Do you have any idea what that could be in this case? What could link the word méchant, so a bad person, and the mèche, and the same for wick and wicked? Any guesses? What do we say usually? Yes, it's a bad thing, although the mèche or the wick are not necessarily bad things, right? If you were, yeah, the sounds. Okay, I'll tell you, because it's a bit tricky in the beginning. The idea of torsion. When we talk about a bad person, we say they're twisted. They have a twisted mind, right? And the wick is also twisted. So there's something about how both cultures decided to use that concept of twisted, and intertwined to describe something. That would be the gravity field, the force field that attracts these words together. And according to his theory, it's very interesting because you could start with different roots, but somehow in our subconscious, in our collective subconscious, in our drive to understand reality, we all merge into words that have different sounds. And we're going to find those links over and over again. If it was just one or two cases, I wouldn't bother with it. But there's so many that you start seeing a big pattern. So let's expand a little bit on this. You take two concepts on any language of the world, right? And you say, what links a mother to a horse? Are there two words in any given languages that sound the same? And one means mother and the other one horse. I'll give you the first one. Bride in English, and bride in French is the bridle, the reins, okay? Now I give you the second one, marry or married. Can you think of a word in English that has M and R in it and that relates to horses? Yes, perfect, mare. Okay, so right there we have a square unit, okay? And then you say, well, two words, that's not too much to find a connection. Let's keep going. Yes, very good, Trevor, I'm coming to it. Here, so far we had Indo-European languages, but what happens here? We have Mande, and Mande is a West African language. And you get wife and you get wifo. And actually the plural of wifo is wed, like when somebody has been wed, a wedding. Okay, then what's the word for, in the Danish word for wife? Anybody knows?
I'm Danish.
Okay, it's kone. It's kone. And in Russian, this one somebody will know. In Russian for horse?
Конь.
Yes, okay, very
Nonsense.
close, yeah. Oh, very good. Japanese waifu, same thing, see? Konь, perfect. That's the Russian for horse. Okay, so you see, now we have 4. Now it's starting to be a little bit curious, right? There's a little bit too much of a coincidence. And like some of you said on the chat, we have ma and ma, and this one is particularly interesting because you have the same particles. So I think, he doesn't say this in the book, but I think that ideograms, pictograms, ideograms, letters even also share this interesting pattern here. Okay, so once you have this set of square units, what could be linking the wife or the bride or the horse and the horse? Maybe you say, well, yes, a man carries off a wife on a horse. Maybe people back then thought, well, once the wife marries, she's the man has the reins, or usually in archetypal interpretations, exactly, someone I possess, perfect. Oh, thank you for that example. Yes. Let's say also women have been associated with wild emotions, right? Wild horses, etc. So there's all kinds of metaphoric interpretations that you can give just to this little bit of information, right? But then that's not the end of it. We're trying to form a molecule. Remember, like I showed you in the beginning, these are just the atoms. The sounds are just the atoms. So then he says, okay, let's take horse and water. And you have mare, 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 mare again, aqua, ecus. And then he says, okay, if the mother, the wife, is linked to the horse idea somewhere, and the horse is linked to water, then somewhere in some language of the world, you're going to find that the mother is linked to the water too. And what are the words in French for mother and sea?
Maman, océan.
Mère and mère. Perfect. See, same sounds, close enough. Same sounds and different and the same. You're linking these 3 concepts together. So, and in again, I added Chinese here so that you can see that it's also in the characters. Mu, and then here you have hai, and it actually has the same element. Okay. So once you have that, then he starts, I really don't have time to tell you all the theory, but he starts finding more and more connections. So these ones I'll go through very quick. So you have the bride is going to be linked to anything that has to do with pregnancy. See, you have the idea that the mother is wider, that the baby ripens in the belly, and you end up in French with words like enceinte and enceinte, and it actually means wall, the wall for the baby, and being pregnant. And then he connects it to the night, to the husband, to all kinds of things. And you end up with almost a story, like a myth, like the Holy Grail or any myth, actually, like children's stories. Actually, in children's stories, we find that the words used are actually not that random. So the point is that we don't often realize, we take language for granted, we take words for granted. And what if behind our languages, we had these universal kind of links between words? One day, maybe we'll discover why. Linguistics is not there yet. We really don't know. He is Abraham Abessira, is one of the authors that I just quoted, but I'll give you the bibliography in the end. So basically, you end up with some kind of network that looks as if each language is picking a little part of reality. And these are proteins, but to me, it's a bit like, here we had mother, this is mother, right? And each of these spiky little things is one of our world languages. And each of them form the real concept of a mother. In some cultures, the mother will be seen in one way, in others in another way, and you kind of connect them together, and that's the full view, except because we're divided into different languages and cultures, we often miss that elephant. And then all words would be connected, just like in a complex organism in a cell in the body. Now, there's sounds have also a shape, the letter. But also there's something, I don't know if you have ever seen this, sounds depending on the frequency also have an interesting shape. It's called cymatics, and nobody really has studied much of it, but I think there may be a clue there about language. And it's that when you have sand, you put sand on a plate and you above a loudspeaker, and you emit a frequency. And these are all in the pictures here. You see, these are frequencies that we can hear and that we speak about. And each of these sounds form a shape. Actually, the sand vibrates and it forms patterns. Nobody really understands why, but that's just for the pitch, the how bass or how high pitched your voice is. This is an example of a human voice, and they say each of us, our voice is almost like a fingerprints, right? We each have a different pattern. This has been prettified, stylized, but it's the pattern that it would have made in water for a female voice. The three pictures in the back. So you see, there's another aspect of sound and shape that is very, very not known at all, actually, and that might give us another clue. Then we have purely talking about shapes. We have experiments like this one where they ask people to guess which of these weird characters, if you knew the language, you were disqualified for that pair. And if you didn't, then you had to guess which one was O and and which one was E. And most people actually guess right. For example, on this one, I think it's Uyghur, and the U is the longest one. The more ink there was in a letter, the more people actually guessed that it was U. Nobody knows why. Again, it's very, very strange. Like somehow in our subconscious, in our pattern recognition system, we actually managed to associate a letter, which is again thought to be completely arbitrary, with a sound. And if you look at ancient alphabets, I usually find it interesting because historians really try to see how all of these were connected, right? One after the other, and okay, this one came from that one, etc. And although I agree that there's evidence for that, is not always the case, especially if you go back in time. And what you see again is a similarity. These sounds are, these characters are really not that different, right? And you're talking 600 years, but you could go back further back by a lot. And what's most interesting is that you look at the oldest writings, for example, here, and you see a little ox, a house. Some people say it's a bull, a bison, a temple, right? And where else do you see those things? Well, you see them in very ancient caves in Europe, specifically, but people often think, well, those people were just kind of primitive. They were drawing animals, they were counting cattle, they were, they didn't know much, except that there's beautiful books written about world myths and how actually these things that are being depicted in caves show exactly what people believed at that time, that has been that we still remember generation after generation. And what's also found in these caves are at least 32 signs that nobody has interpreted, nobody knows the meaning of. But I think language has something to teach us about all that, and that perhaps at the time people already had a language, and very, very well formed from Homo sapiens onwards, and that is just not, as some people believe, a single mutation. Chomsky, for example, one of the most famous linguists, will tell you that somehow a primitive man woke up or was born really, really smart, and he, because the populations were very small at the time, he reproduced, and then that's how we came to have language. And it's all kind of like a computer, except even the analogy with a computer is kind of stupid if you think about it, because computers don't grow from a single mutation, right? Human beings make computers, and a lot of people are required to make computers. So the whole thing is a bit of a mystery. And yeah, I don't know, I'm sorry if I spoke too fast, but I wanted to hear your questions and just give you a bit of an overview of what has been done. It's very, very rare in linguistics to hear all of this, but I personally am fascinated by it. And I think that for polyglots, just to find a word about polyglots, I think it's super important that we work with linguists, first of all, because we have access to more pieces of that elephant. It's for us, for ourselves, if that doesn't give you a motivation to learn sounds, to learn pronunciation, I don't know what will. For me, it's like accessing another part of reality when I try to pronounce better, because I'm like, oh my God, this sound could actually give me a feeling of what this culture means by each word. There's so many things for linguists. Also, for a polyglot, sorry, if you're teaching a language, you can make your students think of all kinds of things. You can use it for mnemonics. And in a sense, we are, as polyglots, the main example of how the brain and the mind are connected. And that's another thing that science, because of the Darwinist dogma, I would say, science doesn't often study the mind per se, and you guys know that one of the only studies that exist about polyglots says that we use our brain less instead of more than a monolingual person. So how come, if it's all in the brain, well, we should use it more, right? When we're jiggling between languages and stuff. And yeah, I can't explain it. I don't have the answers. Huh? I'm just bringing it up to you, and I hope we can work together. If you're interested, send me an email, ask me for the material that you can read, and I hope we figure it out together, because it really is a mystery. Why would there be tiny atoms and tiny molecules in everything that exists, and in language we're like, oh, sounds are just arbitrary, right? It's kind of weird, don't you think? Anyway, I'm going to read the chat so that if you have any questions. How do you explain false friends? That's a good question. I think that a lot of the times these patterns that I showed you with the wife and the horse, etc., are indicative of some kind of reversion. For example, in some languages, you'll have the word hot is the same sounds as the word cold. So they're opposites. And somewhere in there, I think there's a relationship between those false friends, where maybe, I don't know, I should have a more concrete example, but you take sensitive and sensible, for example. In French, it's sensible, it will be the opposite, right? Those are false friends. When you do the groupings of the words, you end up with if being a specific sound in English for a specific characteristic, and bleu, sensible, édible, etc., being the same, the way French people decided to say this is an adjective, this is something I'm categorizing as something that shares the characteristic of being sensible or sensitive. So each of them have picked a difference, and we don't know why, but I think somewhere along these lines, if we continue to build these nets, we'll find the answer. What got me started in linguistics, that I was just passionate about languages, and I wanted to learn as many as possible, and I wanted to know how they work. It's a mystery. It's the most complex thing in the universe almost. And actually, the discussions on language evolution were banned in 1866, I believe, because it was such a mess. Nobody knows where to start. So yeah, it's pure curiosity, actually. Then how do you explain the word Slav? Do you agree with the idea that it comes from the word slave? Slave. It was mentioned esclavos means a free person. I don't know, actually. That would be interesting. You have to look at the actual roots that are given and start making these connections. And I think it's more to do with I don't know. I'll have to think about it more, but I think it probably has another meaning also in Slavic languages, because these sounds are categorized in different ways. So you'd have to see what the S sound, with the L sound, with the A sound, with the V sound is in your particular language, to try and glean and find out what the original meaning could be. It's not easy to say when you don't have that in your head, actually, for your particular language. It's been done in German, I think, and it's been done to some extent in Japanese. Why mate in, okay, and mate in Maori, what does it mean, Tony?
Death or sickness.
Death also, okay.
It's
Well,
it's
there
the
you go.
part, if you've seen the haka of the All Blacks, it starts off ka mate, which means it's death. And then it
Okay.
says ka ora, which is life, ora.
Ora, okay. So there you go. Why don't you go sit down with pen and paper and try to compare mate and meurtre or muerte, and then you'll start finding. And what's interesting is that sometimes you will find opposites. For example, love. And if you invert the L and the V, you have vile or evil. See, so sometimes there are also, and you find that in biology too, the molecule for vitamin C, for example, depending on the shape, it can be good for your health or bad for your health. Nobody knows why, but we see the same pattern in language. We have opposites, we have all these intrinsic properties that nobody really pays attention to. So that would be one of them.
Oh, thanks.
Am I working? Oh, yes, I'm working on many projects right now, but mainly if you're interested, don't hesitate to write to me, because I'm gonna start publishing all this in a lot more detail on my YouTube channel and on articles. And up until now, I've kind of been a chicken about it because it's so new and so anti-mainstream that I didn't dare put it into. But right now, I feel like I'm finally have a better idea of what to talk about and how, and possibly give courses about it too. So I hope some of you are interested. What kind of content? Well, if you want, you could start with these 3 books I recommended in the talk, because they were the most accessible ones. Even if you're not a linguist, you'll understand it. For Margaret Magnus, you have her thesis, which is also very clear. And if you want to know more about complexity and living organisms and biology, I would probably start with a book by Michael Behe, B-E-H-E, called Darwin's Black Box. Again, I have a ton of bibliography. So if you tell me which languages you speak and what you're interested in, I can sort it out for you and give you more specific details.
Okay.
Is this the wave model? I don't quite understand the question. Let me see if you reframed it anywhere. Oh my God, so many questions, I won't get through it.
Can I maybe unmute myself and just type out the question? So, do you know there's like a family tree model of language evolution?
Yes.
I know that there's a big alternative model, which is called the wave model, and really that's all I know about it. So I just wondered, is this it?
Yes and no, actually. It's very interesting because there's been models like that. The wave model is still too linear, in my opinion. There's something about life that we don't understand. Maybe it's information, maybe it's, some people say it's vibration. We don't really know, actually. And I think we're perceiving traces constantly of it, whether you look at a tree or a wave model, etc. To me, is more indicative of the story, the theory of behind intelligent design. And usually gets criticized because all of a sudden people say, oh, that's not scientific. That's just, you're saying that God created everything. And actually, no, if you look at the details behind the theory, it's just explaining complexity. And just because we don't know right now, it doesn't mean that we won't figure it out later, right? In the 19th century, linguists believed that tonal languages were primitive because they sounded like birds singing. Now, when you think about that now, you obviously realize that it's ridiculous, right? None of us would say that Chinese is more primitive because they use tones, right? So why can't we imagine that in 50, 100 years from now, people are going to say, wow, linguists at the time didn't realize that sounds had meaning. Ha, ha, ha. That was kind of a bit slow of them. So it depends on what you look at. I think any model could help us figure things out. I'm going to look more into the wave model too, but any model can give us hints. And then we try and figure out the rest as we go. What do you think about What do you think about structural linguistics? Well, I myself studied structural linguistics at university. Ferdinando Saussure is the father of that current of linguistics. And yeah, he's the one that said first, the sound is arbitrary. I think it's way past time to go beyond that, because he was the Chomsky of the early 20th century. And what he did is a bit like Chomsky does, is studying language from outside. So only looking at what you see and not combining disciplines, not thinking about biology, archaeology, history, anything like that. So it was very formal. He had langue et parole, and parole was the actual speech in use, and he kind of ignored that, and everything was langue, so the structure. Words combined this way, historically, this way, syntactically, I'm done. I have explained languages. He would never, with structuralism, we could never explain what I just told you about today, for example.
Well, I would definitely recommend showing the full bibliography if possible, because
Yes.
folk are really keen to see the books.
Yes, for sure. Don't hesitate to contact me on our Telegram group or by email, and I'll be happy to share whatever I know. I mean, the sad truth is that nobody really knows that much in linguistics. What I told you took me quite a while to find it, and it's different sources, and none of them quote each other even. So everybody's kind of working in their corner, and so am I. And yeah, if you are interested and you want to read and ask questions and actually, maybe you'll figure it out. Maybe you'll have an idea. Maybe you're a biologist by training and can figure it out. I don't know. I'm just curious, and I don't think we should stop learning because we don't have the answers. In fact, the more questions we have, the more we should keep learning. Well, I'll save the questions from the chat, and you're welcome. I'm glad you liked it. And yeah, see you soon for the rest of the conference, and on my YouTube channel, and whatever you want to meet. I'm looking forward to working with more polyglots. Thank you. Bye-bye.